Good morning, everybody. It's Thursday morning. You might have noticed the thumbnail at the beginning of this devotion. We're kind of calling these last three devotions of the week Sunday leftovers because it's something we do in our life group. We actually do that on Wednesday night. But we look at leftovers from the Sunday sermon and we sort of go deeper in studying them. So that's kind of what we're doing here for the last 3 days of this week. And so anyway, I hope you enjoy some Sunday leftovers. Now, one of the things that we come to also in 2 Peter is this mention of faith. And faith is a common term that we use as Christians. In fact, oftentimes we will refer to a journey of faith, that really faith accompanies us throughout life. Sometimes we think of faith as just the beginning of our Christian life. But in reality, it's sort of a developing and growing aspect that really fits into every part of the Christian life. And, when we look at the passage there in 2 Peter 1 through 11, we see this idea of faith in really a number of different ways. And, in the very first verse, one of the things Peter talks about is identifying with those Christians who have believed or had faith in the real gospel, the real truth, and he refers to them as those who have received a faith as precious as ours. So he makes a distinction between that which is artificial faith and that which is real faith. So the first thing is you got to have real faith in real truth for real growth to take place. In fact, that's the second aspect of faith that we see here, is the aspect of growing faith. Peter then in the second verse talks about grace and peace in abundance. And it's like there's this growing sense, that grace flows through all of life. And so in life, we grow in faith. In fact, one of the evidences that there's real life within us is that there's growth that takes place. When you were a child, you probably had a pretty good idea you were alive because you could measure it, on that little mark that you set on the edge of your door, and you knew that you were growing. Well, that's a pretty good sign of life. Well, it's the same thing here. We have growing faith in our lives. Now, the third thing that Peter mentions here is that we have a powerful faith. He talks about God's divine power is at work within us. And that means that we have a supernatural life that has entered into us. And that life now is really what was lost way back in the garden. But now we possess it again. And God has given us this idea of a powerful faith that will bring about that growth. One of the results of that is a fourth aspect of faith, which is a purifying faith. In verse 4 of 2 Peter, of that first chapter, Peter says that we participate in the divine nature, but then he goes on and he says, so that we escape the corruptions of this world through evil desires. And so this means that one of the aspects of growing is also gaining victory over sin in our life. Now, I know we've been talking about that a lot in the last couple of weeks, but I think it's an important part of our faith. And as we go on in that passage, we see Peter referring to an effective faith. And he warns Christians that if we are not doing these things and growing in these aspects of faith, we're not going to have an effective faith. And he says these things will keep you from being ineffective and unproductive. And God wants to use you in a meaningful way. He wants to not only come into your life to set you apart for heaven, he wants to use you right now in an effective way for his glory. And so we see that in verse 8. Now, in verse 9, we see that there's a clarifying faith. We begin to understand more fully, our faith as we are growing within it. And one of the things that Peter warns us of, he says, if this isn't happening, he says, you're kind of nearsighted, you're short-sighted, and you can even be blind to what God wants to do. And so I encourage then that you develop a clarifying faith in your life as well. Number 7, Peter talks about an evident faith. It's a faith that does stuff. It's a faith that works. We're not saved by works, but we possess a faith that produces works. And that gives evidence that true faith, saving faith, has really come into our life, that we begin to serve God rather than ourselves. Last of all, Peter refers to a hopeful faith. And one of the things he says is we know, or we are certain, that we have an eternal hope of entering into an eternal kingdom with a rich welcome, he says there in verse 11. So when we talk about a hopeful faith, hope in the scriptures is not just wishful thinking or guessing. The idea of hope in the scriptures is that there is a certainty to that. And that's where God wants you to come in this faith journey. And so anyway, I hope that you come to rest in that certainty of your faith and that God takes you through this process of faith as you grow in him. So there's some thoughts for today. Those are part of our Sunday leftovers, and I'll join you tomorrow for some more Sunday leftovers. Bye for now. God bless.